И я убежден, несмотря на то, что я сейчас говорю о Фрейде, Лакане и Абрахама Тёрок, у нас на панели присутствует замечательный теоретик, который продолжал и продолжает развивать эти концепции. Это Браха Эттингер, и я постепенно так перехожу от своего выступления к представлению замечательного человека, художника, с которым мы посчитали сейчас, стоя на пороге ГЦСИ, что мы пропустили юбилей нашей дружбы, я подчеркиваю, не знакомства, а дружбы. 26 лет назад мы познакомились. Вот Олеся Туркина познакомилась с Брахой Эттингер на конференции, которая, кстати, называлась Memory and Oblivion, то есть тоже в тему. 26 лет назад в Гамбурге была конференция «Память и забвение». Вот, и с того момента мы начали дружить. И Браха Эттингер вот в моей голове просто какой-то невероятно уникальный человек, который сочетает в себе художественную практику. Она в первую очередь художница. В то же время она клиницист, она практикующий психоаналитик. И с третьей стороны она теоретик, который пытается, не пытается, а который формулирует свою собственную концепцию, в том числе и теорию памяти, потому что ни одна теория не обходится без теории памяти, когда мы говорим о человеческом субъекте. Вот, и теория, которую Браха назвала когда-то матричная пограничность, вот нас захватила много-много лет назад и до сих пор не отпускает. Это очень сложная и очень своеобразная и, как мне кажется, очень-очень-очень важная теория, поскольку она пытается добить остатки фаллогоцентризма, скажем так. То есть это теория, которая строится на психоанализе, гендерных исследованиях, феминизме, но в первую очередь на своих собственных размышлениях. И когда Виктор Мезиана предложил мне очень любезно вот собрать эту нашу компанию для сегодняшнего выступления, Браха сразу пришла мне в голову тут безоговорочно совершенно, потому что это прямо человек, специально созданный для той проблематики, которую очерчивает и наша панель, и конференция в целом, и выставка. И моя речь тоже во многом была связана с Брахой, потому что есть в центре ее искусства все-таки память, в центре ее искусства невозможное историческое событие, Освенцим оно называется. Это очень странно давать имена тому, чему имена давать невозможно. Я напомню, что это как раз одновременно и возвращаясь к своим размышлениям о травме, которая не вписана в память, хочется сказать, ну вот есть, пожалуйста, вам исторический пример, с которым нам надо что-то делать, исторический пример разрыва истории. Это, собственно говоря, и есть разрыв диахронии, о котором я говорил, когда говорил просто о человеческом субъекте. Хотите, мы можем говорить о субъекте, хотите, мы можем говорить о так называемой большой истории, разрыв, который помечен вот словом Освенцим, предполагающим невозможность свидетельствования о том, свидетельство заключается только в том, что свидетельствовать невозможно, скажем так. Вот, и я думаю, что я не буду представлять сейчас остальных участников нашей панели и просто передам слово Брахе Эттингер для ее выступления, а потом еще во время дискуссии мы вернемся ко всем вопросам, которые я обозначил. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Victor, for a perfect introduction to the subject of memory and trauma, which also helped me to get into what I would like to say. And one of the things I hope to do here in the very short time we have is add a few concepts that can help us to think today the massive effect of transmissed trauma that is arriving to us from the world, not only from the media, but from the flood of images of the media, but basically because we are human beings, and human beings are so built, I believe, human subjectivity is so built, that we are inside ourselves elaborate traces of memory and also traces of oblivion of other people, not only horizontally, people around us, but also vertically, people before us and those who are going to be. And therefore, we need some more tools to understand how can we keep a little fraction of freedom in all this universe which floods us with information, images, and traces of trauma. One of the things right away you have related to the archive and how the archive takes everything. And we have a huge archive where all times are mixed. So the archive contain, and we can go to Bion, and we can go to Torok and Abraham and Derrida and talk about mechanism of containing. It comes from the maternal, and the idea that we contain the suffering of one another, and also we contain one another. But to that I added the concept carry-ons, which together in the word includes to care and to carry. When Polь Целан says, "The world has gone, I must carry you," Derrida gives it all kind of interpretation, and I give it interpretation of my own, which is the world is gone, that hell you're talking about, I must carry you. I carry, therefore I am. I carry you. In the particular case of Polь Целan, it is, first of all, I carry the traces of memory of my mother and of her death, which I did not witness. But so from whatever it is that the archive contains, we have the capacity to make a certain choice of what to make more clear and to carry that, be aware that we carry that, and move on in order to work with it. And one of the things about art, which is not only aesthetics, but art, and therefore between ethics and aesthetics, and between aesthetics and ethic, is not only creativity, but art. We can try to think about all these mechanisms, not only how they traumatize and re-traumatize us, but how also they can offer some kind of healing and some kind of future, so that with our art, we do not work for re-traumatizing, but we work for the future. I called my intervention Memory's Wound is a space within. With the other, and in the self. Depth, space, and carry-ons to think beyond abstraction versus empathy. Abstraction and empathy are two concepts used to think art. One of the entry to think art for the 20th century. I continue with Polь Целan. Black as memory's wound, the eyes root for you. The same poet also wrote, however, we were lying deep in the macchia by the time you crept up at last. but we could not darken over you. Light compulsion reigned. She, the other who is now dead, his mother, he recognizes her not only in the dust of what remained, the ashes that remained from her, but in that particular desire of the human always to work for the light. So finally, and I think it is about the poem or the aesthetic work in the end, it is light compulsion that reigns. We can look in the pain's eye and connect to the sorrow of the other and to the wounds of its oblivion, not simply by looking, but by fragilization our own self, making ourselves less in control, making ourselves less powerful when we have that power to sustain and to care and to carry. So, first concept for our service was carry-ons, and not only including or containing. Second concept is self-fragilization, so that we can reach the vulnerability of the other through self-fragilizing ourselves. And then we are reducing, going one level less than our identity, and connect to the other in that particular trans-connectedness that traces of trauma enable. Art is for the humane, in the sense that it intends the gaze of a viewer as both a being towards death, and Heidegger is here important, but also a being towards birth, which is already at the heart of my matrixial theory. Being towards birth, something we have been forgetting when we formalize the subject, the human subject. Even though the being towards death is at the future's horizon, and the being towards birth reaches the archaic borderline of our existence, at least for a male subject, at the corporeal level. Both work as a meanings on the symbolic and imaginary level for any one of us in our post-traumatic era and post-traumatic future. Clearly, our era is defined by trauma and post-trauma because there is no way to disconnect from the historical trauma of our past. At every moment, we are looking back to the future and looking forward to the past. In other words, trauma must be recognized for humanizing the future. And by humanizing, I don't mean that human being must control everything in the Anthropocene way, destroy everything, but that in any case we have that power to destroy and control. And therefore what is important is to humanize the human being or the human animal, the being towards death, to humanize it by thinking also our responsibility for being towards birth. The model then is not the trauma of birth, to be born, and then to be separated and castrated, but the maternal trauma of birthing in self-facilitation, which is the condition for our capacity to co-emerge with the other. In difference from the abstract of 20th century, which still haunts us, and the early modernity, the challenge today is to work in the realm of abstract beyond the crystalline flat surface, which was its ideal, and beyond the division between abstraction and empathy, and attain both transcendence and the affective and the sensual, through reaching the resonance of what I named, and this will be the third concept for us to realize, sub-reality. I think that psychoanalysis can profit from understanding that we don't only have either memories or repressed memories or divorced memories or no memory of events that have been already articulated, but there is also the non-conscious of the sub-real connections and strings between us and the world, and we can attain that through some kind of awareness to the resonance and rhythm of the sub-reality, but with art and through its materiality, or in working with people. Through working towards compassion, which is beyond empathy, and I hope to explain that later, and enter in resonance with invisible ghosts and sub-real channels of transmission, that realm in space, which is non-conscious, but spreads beyond either the kind of Freudian unconscious, its surrealism, or the figurative, to reflect and bring to awareness and give some visibility to traces of spectral memory and oblivion, that every pure abstraction, with it either flat surface or illusionary geometry, rejects. So I'm saying here that we cannot find our way to the future from that massive traumatic transmission if we think either in terms of figuration and empathy, or in terms of abstract, which become very geometrical, completely transcendent, and reaches the ideal of that crystalline, non-live, inanimated substance, which was a kind of an escape, according to Warringer, from the threat of depth. So, if painting and video, in my case, and other forms of art, accept the organic, accept our circle of life, and the depth of our psyche, and the traumatic charge we are carrying, then another depth appears. A depth which is not associated with perspective, but with the soul and with the meaning of human being as transconnected to other human beings in the present and in the past. The wound space and the depth space of carriance alludes, of course, to the feminine and the maternal. If in early modernity we could imagine to be born from nothing, no past, no mother, today, upon the ruins of this modernity, we can say, if we are born, this means that the past is a passage to the future, throwing the ghosts of memory, repressing the past, erases the future. What you see on the screen is my oil painting, which are done layer by layer by layer for many, many years, so that the color is not a ready-made color, but morphed color, structured color, looking for light if we use the language of Polь Целан. This is from notebooks, which are my nightly art products, where I'm writing down what remains from the day, what ideas remains from the day of 7 hours, 8 hours painting. That's another page from a notebook. These are from the video that are right now presented at ЄКАТЕРИNA in the exhibition curated by Victor Mazin. You see the figure that I call the crazy woman, which is very important for me. It's my alter ego. That's a crazy woman. In the atmosphere of the water, I might talk about this later on. But this atmosphere of the water strongly entered my work in the last 7 years, when my own shell shock emerged after many, many, many years of oblivion, and I could not refuse it, and I had to transform it and work with it. So this is also from, we have a trilogy of videos in the museum, and you could see that with each image, with each frame in the video, also in the painting, there are traces from trauma of the Second World War, women and children and babies naked, going to be executed, and men. It could be in Ponar, near Vilnius, and it could be in Ukraine. And this is a part of what enters our unremembered, traumatic human sphere. Again, oil paintings that we don't have in this exhibition. Maybe we can stay with that to continue and elaborate the question for our time. In Abstraction and Empathy, Warringer writes that the dimension of empathy must vanish from the sphere of abstraction in the visual creation. He presents a split between empathy that concerns the human and abstraction that concerns the inanimate and the crystalline. For me, it was crucial to invent abstraction that relates to the human and to move from empathy towards compassion, both through thinking the certain chosen images that testify to the killing of Jewish people, mothers and children in Mizoch, Rovno, Ukraine in 1942, and the killing of men and women and children in Ponar from Vilnius, including members of my family, in 1941. To this, for the recent works in 7 years, were added 2 traumatic historic events, one that concerned my aunt, as well as one that concerned me directly. My desire to work in the abstract meets again and again a necessity to work with traces of this historical event. Thus, the moments of eternity meets the historical in the painting. I try to give some visibility to invisible subreal strings that transconnect us. In relation to past personal and historical trauma, I hope to introduce the surface crisis to understand that when we are flooded with all these endless images and mass media that brainwash us, we in art can produce now the crisis of the surface that was so very important 110 years ago to the avant-gardists, must be provoked now, and raise some awareness to the potential of the feminine material to be sublimatized and to serve to create meaning. Matrixial depth space, then, in our soul and in the cosmos, is a space of transformation in which, like in pregnancy, you dwell with the other or with things long enough to allow the meaning of psychic and historical trauma to emerge. If there is a possibility in art to work from trauma to healing, art can be strong enough to propose a vision of ethics. This is the passage from art working to the social and even the political. The space where traces of trauma circulate is adimensional or non-dimensional, a kind of counter space that resists the architectural space. It creates its own beauty. We don't need to give up the notion of beauty or leave it to architecture or to fashion or to nostalgia alone. Humanizing traces of trauma and giving them sense and allowing the passage from shock to trauma to begin with, these processes create new notions of beauty. Another thing I want to signalize, and is related to what Victor Mazin was talking about, is the passage from shock to trauma. If Freud, and following that Lacan, talk about that which was not captured in memory and cannot be remembered because it had never been forgotten, I think it is also important to realize that these non-events of non-memory are not only in the quotidian everyday life, but they are a result of some shock, a total surprise to the system that we cannot contain. So art is not only working from traces of oblivion and trauma and make it circulate and heal themselves and transform themselves, but there is also this mysterious passage from shock to trauma. Trauma already, in a sense, the anxiety of the trauma, in a sense, is already protecting us. It protects us from the shock, from the total shock. And so the awareness of all that is in order that we start also to realize the way that culture shocks us in the everyday life through this mass communication. Humanizing traces of trauma, giving them sense, and allowing the passage from shock to trauma to begin with, these processes create new notions of beauty. With attention to intimate and counter event at the level of the subreal, between I and non-I, human or not, art can still humanize us. Human beings, which are human animals, can still be humanized and become humane towards the others and the earth. We have those erotic antennae in our psyche that perceive even beyond logic. Like the mythological Eurydice, they are going searching for some light, a glimpse of a glow, for some sign of possibility for being towards birth. Here, a passage from life drive and death drive, and how life drive is very close to death drive, I would like to give a moment to explain. We believe that Freud talks about the life drive and then the death drive, and that these are two different things. Now, when I present the being for birth, or the drive for birthing symbolically, I problematize also the definition of death drive and life drive, both for Freud, but also for Deleuze and our friend Guattari, for Deleuze and Guattari. Because what is life drive? Life drive, in a sense, does not need us. Life drives passes also through the amoeba, passes through the microbes. In fact, those who are eternally alive, that's horizontal rhizomatization, they were never born either. So the metaphor with that, the analogy, would be microbic life. It's a microbe, you take the cells, they divide themselves, then they divide themselves, and they live eternally. They don't care about us, who are born and then going to die. And therefore, this idea of life drive, developed also by Deleuze, is very, very close for the human to the idea of death drive, which is that space which is irrelevant to ourselves. Whatever is relevant is the fact that human beings are born and therefore are going to die. They come to life in ways of sexuations and not in ways of division. And that's where the third term, being for birthing and desire for birthing. I'm not saying you need to be a mother or a father or to give real birth. I'm saying we are all have been born. We carry traces of a desire which is traumatizing, and the traumatized maternal birthing, the trauma of birthing, not the trauma of birth. And this can tell us something about the incapacity to be that subject which is alone, which cuts the past, which lives beyond lives only the eternal abstraction, and so on. That this eternal abstraction takes us finally to the domain of death. It is then possible to evoke a symbolic and figural being toward birth in a world, even though this world is massively right now enjoying its death drive via endless streams of images, and an imaginary that prefers either full identities or the bacterial forms of life, that depends on endless division and endless horizontality. Personally, for me, in the oil painting and in the video art, the challenge is to create morphing color, line, light, and work towards abstraction. The abstraction of the surreal, and bringing it from invisible to visibility, but always also reaching through the art itself, the traumatic, and touching the wounds of human memory of others, wounds from my own shell shock that was reactivated via the painting process, by the way, and the process of doing the 3 videos installation in the human condition. So they are treating by tracing abstract moves that correspond to different rhythm that in the subreal level are in resonance for me with traces of being towards birthing and the modes of carriance, to carry the living, to carry the dead, to be carried and care for, caring. There I proposed to put a model of the capacity to witnessing, we talked about that, being with and witnessing the trauma of the other of the end of the self, whatever culture hurries to abandon and repress. This takes me from the figure of Eurydice to the figure of the Pietà, the lamenting mother, be it Rachel, the Jewish, or the Madonna. This figure is more relevant than ever. These women, these figures, and their symbols were in fact silenced. We are paying a price for silencing their voice. Each horror repeats and intensifies their silence. When the painting or the video reverberate the strings that connect subjects and objects, subjects and subjects, subject and cosmic thing to the spirit on the one hand, and to the historical trauma on the other hand, via the abstract dimension of depth, which is a proposal for today, depth abstraction. Its beauty humanizes trauma by revealing some knowledge, some sub-knowledge, where the memory of oblivion is whispering. If you self-fragilize yourself, you can hear the voice of that whispering. The painting induces an opening, a mode of self-fragilization, where via beauty, the trauma is accessed and has possibility for sharing and therefore possibility for transmission and relief. As it conducts, transports, and transmits traces of trauma, of oblivion, memory of the effaced, memory of the passage from shock to trauma and back, the work becomes a time space for staying with, dwelling with. Long enough, you stay without objection and without fright. So we remain very, very close to the horror, and we have a time to work its transformation. This is why I called painting long time ago the transport station of trauma. So the last idea that I introduce in the paper is bringing into account the maternal, matrixial, and the feminine to rethink beauty. So beauty will not remain in the fall of history as a kind of aestheticizing harmony we agree upon and so on, and we therefore leave out we don't need. But on the contrary, beauty will be one of the names of the transformation of trauma in the space opened by emotions and affective, sub-real transcending. We sense and we transcend. We sense with the eyes, with the ears, and we also transcend. We see or hear, or we trans-hear the trembling of the resonance of what is connecting everything, what is connecting us one with the other. When the memory of oblivion emerges and takes shape, while the abstract research for the aerial hate goes underwater to deepen depth. When the abstract meets the wounds, traces, in order to affect them and transform them, it is possible to think of beauty even with sublimity, and we should not be afraid of that word. It only means that there are something bigger than us, larger than us, deeper than us, which connect to us. Beauty that concerns compassion meets sublimity that concerns awe and transformation. To overcome the split between trauma and the crystalline, the horizontal and the vertical. First at the level of sub-reality, in art, and then in our own life. The same space that carries us, rocks us, and puts us to sleep, I paraphrase Bashlar, the same space which can be a matter of despair is also what gives us back our mother, the one who, according to Polь Целан, is looking for some grains of light. Thank you.
Спасибо огромное, Браха, за очень теоретичный и одновременно поэтичный доклад получился.